The land had laid derelict for quite a long time, but previously it was mainly an industrial area, and it was used for a wide range of different manufacturing processes, from food through to munitions. Obviously, post-industrial revolution, the site then became derelict. There were some modern industries on it, and lots of the areas were then handed over to the community and were turned into allotments, which were being used without the land being cleaned up in any way. So the purpose of decontamination was to make the area useful for redevelopment. Contaminants came from the manufacture of bombs to go towards the war effort, while simultaneously enemy bombs made somewhere else were being dropped on the site in an effort to stop the bombs being manufactured. One of the contaminants was low-grade radioactive material, which was barium left over from the manufacture of glow-in-the-dark luminous watch faces. To define what a contaminant is, you basically need to decide what is being contaminated. So in this case, that is the receptor, which is defined as a body of water, an animal / some vegetation, or a human being. So a body of water would be a river. For a human being, then the receptor is defined as the most receptive of human beings to contamination, and that's defined as a female under 16. I was validating the soil, so that was a process of sampling the soil, finding if there were any contaminations, and if there were, what it was and at what concentrations it was at. The next step would then be to run those concentrations through a model which would define how dangerous the contamination was. Dangerous in terms of its potential impact on your 16-year-old girl, or your river, or your tree as the receptor. The soil washers are vast pieces of machinery that are made up of steel uprights that house conveyor belts, hoppers, shakers, sieves. They look like a factory within their own right that processes soil. The soil washers, they're fed at one end by a dumper truck which pours in soil, which is filtered down onto a starting conveyor belt. The soil is then treated within the machinery, and it pops out the other end into exactly the same lorry to be taken away. The soil itself would be actually washed in different chemicals depending on which contaminant was in the soil. So it might be like an acetate solution which would dissolve the contamination within the soil, and then you would wash out the chemical you'd use to do the cleaning and be left with a slurry which, when it dried, would be soil that was good enough to be driven back to the site and dumped back in the hole again, so it was clean. Then you would have in situ methods of cleaning, so that would be where you don't dig up the soil, you leave it in the ground, but you treat it in some way. And an example of that treating would be to inject different chemicals into the ground, so like a sticky molasses into the ground around it. The molasses would feed bacteria in the ground, which is unnatural, and that population of bacteria specifically likes eating hydrocarbons, so the bacteria would eat oil. The pink layer is normally made up of a top 30 centimetres of clean topsoil. Clean defined as something that you would happily put in your mouth and not have any adverse effects. Underneath that, So it may be a layer of clay which acts as a barrier. It may be a layer of rubble which allows drainage. It may be an impermeable membrane which stops volatile contaminants leaching out of the soil. The end result was for our 3 receptors, which in reality are a 16-year-old girl living her life from 16 through to 85, a beautiful river passing through the landscape, or a tree that starts growing from the time we leave the site for the next 300 or 400 years, to be able to have their time without being affected by any of the contamination that was left from earlier generations.